In the last few videos, I've been really trying to stress how the entire Fertile Crescent area is one big mixing pot of different cultures, but with most of the influences originating out of Anatolia and feeding down into Egypt and Mesopotamia. I've used a lot of these images from Anatolia in modern-day Turkey, showing a ton of people trying to take down this massive bull. Hopefully they're exaggerating the size, or this is the first boss raid in human history. And apparently the loot was domestication, because this comes from the region that would give us what might be the most important technological advances in all history, the domestication of wheat and cattle. And the really specific details in these images, from the color to what they're wearing and doing, all would be replicated in later cultures of this greater area. These figures are always red, black, or yellow, which is the exact same color scheme used in Egyptian artwork. And what you'll also see in all sorts of Anatolian art is that they're wearing these crudely represented leopard skins. Like, the artist really wanted to make sure you knew what they were wearing. They put these leopard skins on sideways. Unless there was too much starch, obviously it didn't look this flat, but it's just the simplest way to show this. And my wife needs help, but I'm talking about Anatolian leopard skin art. Come on! Putting the phone on mute. Looking at this art, it's fitting that this oldest version is the most primitive. You have the skin sticking out all rigid like this, and we even get this cool guy that has a leopard hat with the head on it and all. It's tough to see, but you can actually see the leopard's face. This is about 9,000 years before Alexander made wearing big cats cool, though to be fair, Lion Man predates this guy by about 30,000 years, being from around 40,000 BCE. The style reminds me of a point of Egyptian art too, that they all have this stiff side angle. But the main point is that this color scheme and this idea of leopard skin wearing people being important figures is a major part of Egyptian culture. And the Minoans, of course, which really needs its own video, but from the red men color scheme, obviously the bull focus, but even this Anatolian image predates the famous man leaping over the bull motif, which has kind of become iconic of Minoan culture. And so I hope you see that my whole holistic point here is that everything from Egypt to some parts of the Mediterranean, the Levant, Turkey, down into Mesopotamia, into Sumer, these cultures all influenced each other. One shared culture, but which did originally spread out of Anatolia. We can be certain of this from many other things that I've covered in these other videos. And I'll start with these really interesting art comparisons that I haven't seen anybody else do a deep dive into, and show some very interesting mysteries around this, but there are aspects of this that are proven by one of the most solid sources we have, DNA evidence. So looking back at the images here, we should know what the paint actually is, and why it was so prevalent that this red color was used even by non-Homo sapiens. Most famously, the Neanderthal paintings of Europe. Red was most commonly derived from red ochre, a naturally occurring iron oxide pigment. Red ochre was abundant, stable, and could be ground into a fine powder and mixed with water, plant oils, or animal fat to create paint. In both Egypt and Anatolia, it was mixed in everything from wall paintings to burial sites, and its association with blood and life made it symbolically potent. Black pigment was usually made from carbon black, produced by burning organic materials like wood or bones, or occasionally from manganese oxide, a mineral-based black. In Egypt, carbon black was also used in cosmetics such as eyeliner or kohl, and for outlining hieroglyphics and figures in tomb paintings. The use of these pigments across both cultures shows not only shared practical methods, but a deeper symbolic language rooted in color, nature, and ritual meaning. And I want to present the most common kind of basic answer for some of these questions, but I do think they're kind of vague and just commonly given, almost hand-wavy. I honestly don't see how it perfectly matches up with what we're seeing in Anatolian and Egyptian art. But what you'll often hear is that in ancient Egypt, red was commonly used to depict male figures, while women were often painted with lighter yellow or pale tones. The color convention is said to reflect gender roles, with men working outdoors and being more sun-exposed, while women were portrayed as more domestic and sheltered. Symbolically, red in Egyptian culture also conveyed vitality, power, and life, but could also imply chaos and aggression, especially when associated with gods like Set. Black, on the other hand, represented fertility, regeneration, and the underworld, drawing on the association with the rich, dark soil of the Nile. Remember, they called themselves Kemites, people of Kem, and Kem means the black soil, the black land. This is why deities like Osiris, the god of rebirth and the afterlife, were often shown with black skin, not as a sign of death, but of eternal life. It's from the black soil that life arises. In Anatolian art, especially from Neolithic and Hittite periods, red and black pigments were also used to depict figures and symbols, although the meanings were often more stylized or abstract. In places like Çatalhöyük, red and black were applied in ritualistic wall paintings, where they may have represented life, blood, divine presence, or transformation. Some scholars interpret the red as symbolizing life force or fertility, while black might denote ritual mystery, death, or underworld associations. Though the evidence is more interpretive than textual. Like in Egypt, these pigments were not used for just artistic purposes, but to convey a cosmic or sacred dimension in depictions of humans, gods, or ritual figures. That all sounds good, and while it might be true for a lot of instances, looking at the images, during the hunt there are red and black figures actively fighting. While we have dead, headless figures that are red, everything from animals to people and body parts seem to be depicted as red or black. Same for the Egyptian. Doesn't seem like it's trying to convey any virility, that the red ones have extra energy or something, and that only the black color is used to show death, or vice versa. Same for the Egyptian. Don't these just look like they're two different skin tones? I don't even want to say a different people group or race, just look at the hair, head shape, the eyes, even jewelry and clothing, it's all the same. They carry all sorts of objects, but there doesn't seem to be anything meant by what's depicted or by the skin color, just that it really is just a different skin color. And this more matches what we see in other artwork where different people groups are being shown, while saying that within certain groups we also see these shades. I mean, even modern day black people use the term like red or yellow to describe different shades of black skin. And so we have some Egyptian artwork that is clearly trying to show different people groups. The famous tomb of Seti I, which has an Egyptian, an Asiatic, like Western Asia, what we might call the Middle East and Levant today, a Nubian, which is south of Egypt and has darker skin, and a Libyan, which is the lightest skinned people shown, people more descended from the Anatolia and Mediterranean region. It's confusing because Libya's in North Africa, but of course they're setting up colonies all along North Africa. And so all these different groups are intermixing, but if you wanted to zoom in on any one of these people groups, of course you would have different shades within that group. So again, looking at the Anatolian and Egyptian depictions of these red and black figures, there doesn't seem to be any status or anything else that differentiates them besides the simple color. But if we say that, then what do we make of the Çatalhöyük images? While we can't know exactly what the people of Çatalhöyük look like, genetic, skeletal, and artistic evidence allows us to build a fairly accurate picture. Genetically, these early Neolithic farmers belong to a population known as Anatolian Neolithic, and their closest modern relatives are found among populations in central and western Turkey, as well as parts of southern Europe, so people like the Greeks, Cypriots, Sicilians, and modern Italians. They also share some ancestry with Levantine groups, like Lebanese Maronites and Syrians, though that's to a lesser degree. These groups have higher levels of early Near Eastern farmer ancestry compared to Northern or Eastern European populations who later mixed with steppe and hunter-gatherer groups. In terms of their appearance, Çatalhöyük people likely had olive to light brown skin, dark hair, and brown eyes. Maybe like this guy? Çatalhöyük, man, confirmed. And these are genes typical of early Near Eastern farming populations. These facial features were probably a blend of Mediterranean and Southwest Asian traits, straight or wavy dark hair, and relatively robust builds. Oh, confirmed, baby. Artistic representations from Çatalhöyük, while highly stylized, show figures with braided or shoulder hair length in idealized male and female forms, especially in the well-known mother goddess figurines. And so these artifacts suggest a culture that valued both symbolism and bodily representation in the real world, but that doesn't mean that all of their art is trying to portray them literally. So they were not dark or black skin, nor were they a hue like the sand people, like you might call red. And just more to this point, and showing that it's symbolic, we have these figures that are a mix of colors, some half red, half black, and some half black, half yellow. I'll be clear, throughout all the research, no one has a great answer for this. If you somehow know something I didn't come across, or you have your own theories, for sure comment those down below. Maybe they come from two different classes or tribes, some sort of group of people that are not actually these colors of course, but symbolized by these colors. But the only clue to this may come from the painted skeletons. When discussing burials in this region, archaeologist Marco Molina says, quote, "Their bones were partially painted, excavated several times, and reburied. These results reveal exciting insights about the associations between the use of colorants, funerary rituals, and living spaces in this fascinating society. The study shows that red ochre was most commonly used at Çatalhöyük, present on some adults of both sexes and children, and that cinnabar was used for males and blue and green was used for females. The number of burials in a building appears associated with the number of subsequent layers of architectural paintings. This suggests a contextual association between funerary deposition and application of colorants in the domestic space. Dr. Molina says, quote, "This means when they buried someone, they also painted on the walls of the house. And at Çatalhöyük, some individuals stayed in the community. Their skeletal elements were retrieved and circulated for some time before being buried again. This second burial of skeletal elements was also accompanied by wall paintings. So they would bury their family members under their houses, take the bones up, paint them, and then paint on the wall, and then put them down, eventually bring them up again, repaint them and the wall. And a reddish paint was used for males, and bluish green was used for women. And so we don't see any blue or green colors on the hunters. Maybe these half-half characters are from two different groups, with yellow being the most rare. Or it was the rare female hunter, since this color would also line up with the lighter and yellow colors used to represent women in Minoan and Egyptian art. But since we have some that are half black and half red, I think if I had to pick, I would say that it has something to do with them playing two different roles within their culture. Almost like the black, red, and yellow role are not so far off. They must have a lot of common skills to all be in the hunt. But for whatever reason, some people are just hunters, and other people are both kinds of hunters. Almost like a multi-class in a video game, or saying that you're from two different martial arts schools, and so you might have something symbolic from each. No matter what, this is obviously done intentionally. They are deliberately marked out as different from the more common red and black figures. And like I mentioned in the beginning, it's obvious that they really want to show off these leopard skin trophies. Almost all, but perhaps more importantly, it's not all of these hunters that actually have one. These leopard-lacking lads may be the younger men who have not successfully killed one themselves, or have not hit some cultural milestone to be given one, or just in general be allowed to wear one. It must be exclusive in some sense, something to be proud of and what set you apart. And this tradition would work its way down into Egypt, along with things we'll look at in a sec, like grains and cattle. Just as the whole world was influenced by England and its culture, everything from industrial capitalism producing the goods to dressing in suits and wearing watches. Even if you want to nitpick that point and say that those things actually developed out of Germany or some other part of Europe, I'm proving my point that we don't know exactly where it came from, but these were most established and most pushed by this culture, be it England or this Anatolian culture. And this Anatolian region would go on to influence the rest of the Fertile Crescent, down into Sumer and down into Egypt. In ancient Egypt, we get a lot more documentation, and we can see that for sure these carry a lot of symbolic weight. High-ranking specialists, especially the Sem Priests, were commonly depicted in funerary art wearing a leopard skin draped over one shoulder. The garment was most notably worn during the opening of the mouth ceremony, which was meant to restore the senses and spiritual vitality of the deceased. The leopard skin symbolized the priest's ability to control chaos and death, acting as a mediator between the living and the dead. It was not merely decorative, but a potent religious symbol representing sacred authority, order, and cosmic balance. This may seem disconnected from the hunting figures. A priest and a hunter are usually considered completely different types of people, but consider that this development occurred over thousands of years, all in an era where we're seeing the rise of domesticating plants, animals, and really domesticating people. You can see the increased bureaucracy, the ever-increasing veneration of kings, the greater separation between leader and subject, as also being products of this new age of bringing things under the domination of leadership of humans. Just as a man would shape his own personal garden, and maybe bringing his cattle under his will, some humans would shape other humans to their will. Not that all priests saw this as their relationship with their temple attendees, I'm not trying to be cynical about it, but when we see the later boastful and cruel kings and pharaohs that rise up over the following thousands of years, they all start seeing themselves as king of kings or living gods. The role of the religious leaders in this time, where the greatest threat was no longer wild animals or a lack of calories, but were the warring neighboring empires, the priest was crucial in getting everyone to work together for shared goals and seeing it as all as part of something that was larger than themselves. Even when they put down their spears and picked up their reed pens, they were still working to protect their society and conquer the forces of chaos, just like the leopard skin wearing characters in Anatolia. They were literally fighting the wild beasts to provide for their families, and now the priests are sort of fighting the wild beasts and other forces of chaos within us and within other empires. In Mesopotamia, animal skins were less prominently depicted, but still held symbolic significance. There are figures, especially mythic or heroic ones like Enkidu in the Epic of Gilgamesh, described as wearing animal skins. Enkidu's wild, untamed appearance, including his clothing made from animal hides, was meant to represent his liminal status between nature and civilization. Some cylinder seals and reliefs showed priests or divine beings in garments with patterned or spotted designs, which may represent animal skins, though there is a debate on this. In this context, animal skins, while not as central as in Egypt or Anatolia, still suggest strength, transformation, and a connection to divine or chaotic powers. Together, these traditions show that across the ancient Near East, leopard and animal skins symbolized more than status or decoration. They marked individuals as intermediaries between worlds, whether shamans, priests, or mythical beings, and conveyed power over life, death, nature, and the spiritual realm. But if I can push it even further, I think it's interesting to consider that these characters may have been the ones that were bringing the domestication technology into new regions. And that's why it might have such a strong religious connection, as these powers over nature would be seen as magical. What I love so much about Egyptian and Mesopotamian myth is that they don't separate magic from reality. Scrolls, spells, things like that, they're all a type of technology. There are, air quotes, spells that we have recovered that are describing how to just do everyday things. The magic was in being able to understand this and transfer it from one person to another, and then actually transform the world around you. And so I don't think it's that big of a stretch that we have these leopard-wearing elite coming from the area where the first cattle domestication and plant domestication is happening, and then we see the bull motifs and leopard-wearing characters playing such a priestly role in these areas. Maybe the people who first brought this actual practical technology, but with a worldview that everything in nature is animated and with its own spirits, they are like a priest, able to transfer these spirits, these energies from either the wild hunt into the population and its buildings and all the other things that the humans created. They saw this all as a spiritual process, channeling creator gods into an area, vanquishing chaos gods, and causing grains to rise and cattle domestication, creating increased population, more people, and more building projects. It's all because of this magic, this technology that comes from Anatolia, from these black and red depicted, leopard skin wearing warrior priests. Because all these civilizations rise once we see the domestication of beef and wheat, which we know started in Anatolia. Researchers are as certain of this claim as they can be, because this is proven through the most solid scientific method we have in studying ancient cultures. This isn't subjective art comparison, but DNA. Modern genetic analysis of domesticated wheat strains like einkorn and emmer show that their DNA is most closely related to wild wheat still found in southeastern Anatolia. Domesticated wheat has a non-shattering rachis, the stalk that holds the seeds, meaning that it doesn't fall apart as soon as it's ripe, which is good for harvesting, but bad for nature. It won't simply blow away in the wind. Archaeologists found ancient wheat with these domestication traits in early Anatolian settlements. The oldest examples of charred seed grains and grinding stones dating back to around 10,000 to 9,000 BCE, and it shows that humans were processing grains in the area of Çayönü, Göbekli Tepe, Nevelchori, and Karajda. And some of these are regions in the Levant where we see the first barley domestication as well. But again, the simplest and most scientific proof that wheat and barley originated in this region is just the DNA results, which show that all the later permutations of these species, as they were further selectively bred and crossbred with other species, they all have the most in common with these early transitional examples we have from Anatolia, the modern-day Turkey region. And sites in this region predate the occurrence of these grains in Egypt and Sumeria by thousands of years. Over the course of the next few thousand years, we do start to see this new tech become a staple in both areas. The strands of domesticated wheat and barley appear in Egypt by 6,000 to 5,000 BCE, and farming becomes widespread along the Nile, along the Badarian and Naqada cultures, from around 4,400 to 3,000 BCE. By the early dynastic period of around 3100 BCE, beer and bread were already central to the Egyptian diet and temple offerings. Brewing facilities have been found in Old Kingdom tombs and even earlier, like Hierakonpolis. Two primary grains, emmer wheat and barley, were the foundation of the Egyptian diet, used to make beer and bread, the two staples consumed by nearly every class of society. These grains were cultivated along the fertile floodplains of the Nile and were processed in households and in state-run facilities. Beer, known as henket, was not only a common drink but a nutritional necessity, providing calories, hydration, and a safer alternative to water. Egyptians brewed it by fermenting a mash of partially baked bread from the emmer wheat or barley, and it resulted in a thick, mildly alcoholic beverage often consumed with a straw. Beyond its dietary role, beer and grain held deep religious significance. Bread and beer were the most common offerings to the gods and the dead, appearing in tombs, temple rituals, and funerary texts as essential provisions for the afterlife. The god Osiris, associated with agriculture and resurrection, was closely linked to the annual grain cycle and harvest. Baking and brewing scenes are commonly depicted in tomb art, emphasizing their sacred and eternal role, and the priest offered beer daily in temple rites, and grain offerings symbolized life, sustenance, and divine favor. In both practical and spiritual terms, wheat, barley, and beer were inseparable from Egyptian identity, fueling physical bodies, sustaining the gods, and sustaining your body in the afterlife, providing a living link with the dead. By 6000 to 5000 BCE, agriculture had also spread into southern Mesopotamia, where early settlements like Eridu began cultivating these grains. Barley in particular thrived in the salty soils of the region and gradually became the dominant crop. By around 4000 BCE, Sumerians were already brewing beer from fermented barley, creating a thick, porridge-like drink that was safer to consume than water and was rich in calories. During the Uruk period from 3100 to 2900 BCE, some of the earliest written cuneiform tablets recorded the distribution of barley and beer as wages for laborers and temple workers, showing that here too beer was central to the economy. It was not only a staple of Sumerian diet, but also a sacred substance. It featured heavily in religious ritual, temple offerings, and feasts. By around 1800 BCE, the hymn to Ninkasi, a poetic text honoring the god for beer, it doubled as both a religious hymn and a brewing recipe. It's an example of what I meant by them not separating the gods from the practical, day-to-day physical world around them. You honored Ninkasi, the god of beer, by making more beer. You brought Ninkasi-ness about. In myth, beer symbolized civilization itself. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the wild man Enkidu becomes human through drinking beer and eating bread. Throughout the 3rd and 2nd millennia BCE, beer and barley were deeply woven into Sumerian mythology, temple economy, and daily nourishment, reflecting a civilization that quite literally rose on a foundation of grain and fermentation, with that grain without a doubt coming originally from the southern Anatolia region. Same goes for the cattle. All modern Bos Taurus, the humpless European and Near Eastern type of cattle, are traced back to a small group, about 80 individuals, of aurochs, which were wild cattle. These cattle diverged genetically from wild aurochs around 10,500 to around 10,000 years ago, about 8500 BCE, and this perfectly matches with archaeological evidence. It's when we see the rise of these Anatolian cities, and especially the bull colt imagery shown all throughout Çatalhöyük. All early Egyptian cattle were Bos Taurus, domesticated in the Fertile Crescent, especially Anatolia, northern Syria, and Iraq. These domesticated cattle were brought into Egypt via Sinai or Levantine routes, likely by around 7000 to 6000 BCE. But they experienced local environmental pressures and selective breeding by their new owners. This is how you get what are called Egyptian longhorns, frequently shown in Old Kingdom tomb art around 2500 BCE, with their long, curved horns and sleek bodies. Some of the most famous Kemetic religious traditions center around a divine Bos Taurus, like the Apis bull sacred to Ptah, the Nevis bull associated with Ra and worshipped at Heliopolis, and the Bukis bull of the war god Montu with his cult center in Hermonthis. The Egyptians continued the Anatolian tradition of bull reverence, taking it from the plastered-over skulls that were hung up on the walls of personal homes in Çatalhöyük. And now they have these massive statues adorned with gold, surrounded by worshippers, filling the air with the sounds of prayers and the smells of holy incense, and encased in large temple complexes. But again, the very breed of cattle and the fact that it was cattle and not wild aurochs is all because of these Anatolian innovations. Same for Mesopotamia. In Mesopotamian religion and culture, Bos Taurus had a symbolic and deeply spiritual meaning beyond its economic value. Cattle were closely linked with themes of fertility, strength, kingship, and divine power. Bulls in particular symbolized fertility and cosmic order, often associated with major gods. The storm god Adad, or Ishkur, and the sun god Shamash were both symbolized by the bull, reflecting power, weather, and justice. The bull of heaven, featured in the Epic of Gilgamesh, was a celestial creature sent by the goddess Ishtar to punish Gilgamesh, showing how cattle imagery represented both divine wrath and cosmic balance. Temples received cattle as ritual offerings, and large-scale animal sacrifice was part of major religious festivals. In art and cylinder seals, bulls were often depicted guarding sacred spaces, or shown in conflict with heroes, symbols of chaos or divine testing. The Lamassu, the mythical bull-man-lion hybrids that guarded Assyrian palaces, also drew on this sacred cattle symbolism. And maybe even that big cat idea, saying, well, what's better than a leopard? A lion. And I, the big great king, is protected by these giant bull-man-lion hybrids. The strength of a bull, the deadly skills of a lion, and the intelligence of a human. But overall, the Bos Taurus in Mesopotamia embodied the complex blend of the sacred and the practical, bridging daily life with the divine. And I just want to make sure I point this out, it was a bit confusing in older videos, but researchers do think that the zebu cattle is the result of a separate domestication event in South Asia, somewhere around modern India, Pakistan, Afghanistan region. Unlike Bos taurus domesticated in Anatolia, the zebu are easily recognized by their distinctive shoulder hump, a large dewlap, and superior heat and disease resistance, traits that make them well suited to tropical and arid environments. Zebu spread westward into the Middle East and Africa primarily through trade and migration, especially during the 2nd millennia BCE. In Mesopotamia, they appeared relatively late and were usually kept alongside Bos taurus, and would forever remain less common. In Egypt, zebu cattle began appearing around 1500 BCE, so around a millennia after the pyramids were built, and likely through contact with Nubia or the Near East, and were sometimes depicted in New Kingdom art. While interbreeding occurred between Bos indicus and Bos taurus, producing hybrid cattle with a mix of physical and adaptive traits, sacred cattle like the Apis bull would always remain strictly of Bos taurus origin. So yes, there was a separate domestication event in northern India, but it has nothing to do with this video, because of when it was developed and when we know it shows up in Mesopotamia and Egypt, and the fact that that hump is not shown in the art or other depictions, nor is it of the same species as things like the Apis bull, it has no bearing on my point here that all of these cultures are deriving from this bull-worshipping cult in Anatolia. And perhaps these red and black characters wearing their leopard skins were part of those that helped spread these advances across the Fertile Crescent. No matter what, I think it's interesting. If you thought so too, please hit that like button, comment your critiques or other ideas that might have inspired this, and suggestions for future videos. Subscribe so you don't get lost in the algorithm, and I hope to see you in the next one. Thanks.